Okay, so 1 2 1 2. Okay, that seems to be testing live stream audio. Testing live stream audio. This is about 30 seconds behind. One, two, testing, 1 2. This is a sound check. 1 2 1 2.
just to remind you all that we are live streaming and it's started now. Thank you. Heads up. Right, good afternoon and welcome to the Utilities and Roading Committee that was being held in the function room in Rangiora Town Hall on Tuesday the 15th of September 2020. Apologies please. No apologies. Right, move on then. Conflict of interest. Anybody have any conflict of interest on this particular meeting? Right. So we'll move on then. We'll go with confirmation of minutes, please, which is on. Thank you. Good. Thank you. Anything that anyone wishes to discuss, matters arising on it? No, all those in favour, please say aye. Against carried. Thank you. Anyone wishing to bring up anything that's arising from the minutes? Yes. Do you want to turn your light on, please? Thank you.
Thank you. Just on page 9 of the minutes, Colin confirmed that Three Waters would be submitting a report on leakage across the whole supply network for a future meeting. Is there a date for that? Today? Oh, okay. Apologies.
That's all right. Thank you. Yes. See, Philip.
Just one question from Kelly, whether there'd been any update on the water safety plans?
There's one water safety plan that we're presenting to you today, which is the Ahuka water safety plan. We have been involved at a national level with finding out the status of water safety plans nationally. We are aware via Water New Zealand that no water safety plans have been approved under the new framework, and they have. There was a joint letter from Water New Zealand and a local government New Zealand to the Ministry of Health, and the letter back from the Director General of Health said that while no water safety plans have been approved yet, there are some imminently that are to be approved, or that they are about to be approved. They also indicated that all large water supplies, as well as water suppliers with unchlorinated water or without a residual disinfection, were written to in October 2019 about the requirement to submit water safety plans under the new framework. We did not receive that letter, as far as we're aware, and have asked the Ministry of Health for a copy of the letter that was prepared by the Director General of Health. The other thing that we are aware of is that at a national level it appears that the drinking water assessors are using a consultancy called waimakariri to moderate all water safety plans approval, and I think that's particularly so for large water supplies, potentially, as well as supplies that do not have residual disinfection. So the long and short of it is we have not had any progress with the Waikato Beach. The next one we need to resubmit is within Pegasus, and we hope to do so in November. There will be an updated version of that water safety plan for resubmission.
Do we have any submitted at the moment pending approval?
Yes, we do. We have Waikuku Beach, and we also, that's been assessed. Yeah, and Cust and Caringham. I've got a report on the Waikuku Beach.
Yeah, you have. Okay. Thank you. Just wondering, do you want to go down that bottom end? Sit there for presentations shortly. Yeah, both. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Right, there's no any deputations and presentations, none that I know of.
No.
Thank you. Right. Now we'll move on to proposed closure of Stockwater Race. Libby and Kelly. Thank you.
Got it going. Cool. This report seeks approval to close Stockwater Race R3K2A, which is a 1.6 kilometre long portion of the scheme that runs predominantly adjacent to Sienna Place. It's the terminal end of the scheme, which ends at Bradley's Road. It's understood that the channel has been predominantly dry for the last 2 years, and as part of the report and the process, we identified 15 affected parties. 10 of those provided feedback, 8 in support, 2 in opposition, and one of the parties in opposition just had noted some flooding concerns, but obviously as part of any applications to fill in any portions of the race, drainage staff will assess any flood effects, so that consideration is thought to be mitigated through that process. And obviously where the drainage and stockwater channel are combined, we wouldn't be allowing any filling in of that portion.
Any questions? Thank you. Oh, did you want to? Yeah, first, right. Yes.
Yeah. Have we looked, and you got one person opposed to it with the water race with their insurance with flooding and all that? Have we looked into that? Is that a genuine reason for them having that there?
I haven't looked into their statement, however we're assuming that if it isn't going to cause any adverse drainage or flood effects, that wouldn't be an issue. So drainage staff will assess if they come in for application to fill it.
So they've put here they've opposed to the water race of our flood control. Where is it? Here. Page 21. So, and we haven't looked into those people that's put feedback on them.
So the person that opposed it, if you turn to page 30 of the agenda, there's a plan there that shows 2 properties, one at the end of Sienna Place, number 67, and the other one at the end of, I believe it's Villano Place. So you may be able to make out, so their main concern is the water race channel along their northern boundary or northwest boundary. And their concern is at the moment if that we close that race, it potentially could get filled in. You might be able to make out from that plan that there's a dashed green line that also superimposes on top of the blue line. So what will actually happen is that when the water race closes, that blue line status will disappear, then it'll be shown as a drain maintained by council. So their concerns about if we remove the status of the water race, they just want to make sure that it's not going to adversely affect the drainage, and in this case it will be retained as a drain, and a drain that council maintains to ensure that it functions adequately into the future.
Yeah, thank you. And one other question on it. have we surveyed any other potential problems with closing this water race uphill or downhill from this area as well? And I think Kelly will probably answer that because he knows where I'm trying to come from.
It's fair to say, and also looking at page 30, you will be able to note that you can see these locations where the blue line and the green dash line superimpose on top of each other. So that's where it's a combined water race and drainage channel at the moment. And there are other locations where the water race is separate to the drainage channel. So the key thing that we need to make sure is where they are combined at the moment, that race will the drainage channel will not be able to be filled in the future. Where it's purely just a water race, there's the ability for it to be filled in, but in considering whether we can fill it in, we need to make sure that that's not going to create any localized issues, that if you fill in the channel, that flow will occur out to the road and into the road drainage system. The other thing as part of that, there may even be a sequencing or order. So we can't have a downstream property fill in a race before an upstream property does, because that might actually be the point of discharge for upstream properties. So it's going to require drainage staff working closely with any landowners that do actually want to fill in their water races to make sure there aren't any unintended drainage issues that arise from this.
Philip.
Thank you. I note that only 8 of the 15 residents support closure. I just wondered, what level of support do you require in order to recommend closure?
As far as I'm aware, we don't have like a set percentage, but the remainder didn't provide any feedback. So 8 in support, but then also 5 silent that didn't provide in the month any feedback on it.
Madam Chair, I note that we're going out for stock water supply bylaw review as a special consultative procedure. Can you just update on the time frame for that? And, well, clearly we're still considering closures while we're preparing information for that review. And is that going to continue? So, 2 questions.
And we actually just had a meeting about the bylaw review. So we're still intending on meeting the June 2021 approximate time frame for conducting the special consultative procedure and getting public feedback. What was the second half of the question?
Are we, well, clearly because you've got this here, we
Yes.
appear to be still considering closures.
Yes.
And will that continue?
Yes, as far as I'm aware. Yeah, under the current rules, we'd have to assess based on what we currently have available.
Just further to that, what staff have also undertaken, particularly with the Water Zone Committee and Environment Canterbury, is we will provide an annual report through to them on total changes in the previous 12 months to our stock water race system. So the key point of that is, while we acknowledge that the water race system is leaky and that does provide a benefit to aquifer recharge, we have a total of about 130 kilometres of water races within the district, and we want to make sure that any, while we're not going to stop closures, we want to track them and monitor to make sure the net effect of any beneficial aquifer recharge is not compromised. And what we have done is looked back to when the race system was, or the irrigation system was originally put in back in 1999, and we've got stats that actually show what the changes have been over the past 20 or so years to the overall water race system. So while there have been closures, they are relatively minor compared to the total length of races. And our discussions with ECAN and the Zone Committee have been that at the moment we do not have any plans to undertake large-scale closures of the stock water race system.
That report, when will we get the first one? We haven't had a first one, have we?
No, apart from Minch providing a verbal update to the Zone Committee, we haven't presented that in a report format, but we would be happy to take one to the Land and Water Committee this calendar year.
Mayor Dan, did you wish to ask a
Well,
question?
ask a question, just in light of what Councillor Stewart asked, and given that we're in a review, is there any reasons why is there any reason why you wouldn't consider this laying on the table pending the review of the stock water race bylaw in the interim, or do you feel you've got adequate grounds in which to continue to recommend to us to proceed in the along the line that you've recommended?
So our recommendation would be to proceed with approving the closure of this stock water race. This originally was initiated by the landowners in the area. They wanted the race closed. It was initially picked up by Waimaka Irrigation Limited to engage with some of the landowners, and then formally taken over by Libby to progress and consult with the affected landowners. We have actually had some feedback already as into the protracted process to actually get it closed. And we have advised the landowners that we do have a formal process to go through. So our recommendation would be to proceed with the closure. I think in terms of the bylaw review, that is a key consideration. We're not at the moment. We're not suggesting to make any changes to the bylaw as part of acknowledging the environmental benefit of aquifer recharge. We're looking at bringing a report to UNR in November, asking for approval to consult on that. So that will give you a better flavour at that point in time regarding the aquifer recharge side of things.
Okay. Any other questions? Thank you, and I'll second it. Thank you. Oh, sorry.
I moved. Yep. And
I second it. Yeah, thank you.
just in moving, Madam Chair, just want to acknowledge the efforts that have gone in by staff in this, and it's quite an extensive process as has been outlined. So I'd just like to commend Libby on the work that's been undertaken here. I don't like closing services unnecessarily if we don't need to, but in this instance it's clear where the landowners have requested. It's been through an exercise where you have the Water Race Advisory Group and also the Oxford Ahoka Community Board also supporting this. It's been through quite a thorough process here, and as was mentioned in the report, it talked about there's now a large number of lifestylers through there. It's converted to that, and it's no longer required for stock water. It's been initiated by the landowners as well. The other reason that was was well put is that it will still be the drainage will still be maintained through there. It would have been a concern to me if that hadn't have been the case, given the issues that we had some years ago. I'm sure we'd have a resident very nearby that would be giving us some fairly direct feedback if we hadn't been, and rightly so, because drainage is an issue of concern in that community. So look, I'm supportive of it, and I think we've done our homework on it, so thanks to the staff for the work that they've done in preparing this and putting this to us.
Just also, having been with the Oxford Hoka Community Board, when we listened to this, and I actually did raise the point that this drain is historical, and I'm just very cautious of how much more we can cut them off, close them down, because it just, and the people that are buying these pieces of land don't actually understand the historical part of this water race, and I think it needs to be known. So thank you. Yes.
While I'm not going to oppose the closure of this, because I am comfortable with the research that's gone on behind the recommendation, I'm becoming less comfortable with the increasing, well, it looks like to me, increasing number of closures, and I'm a bit concerned, if I understood Kelly correctly, about the special consultative procedure, which may not be recommending any change from how the stockwater race operates at the moment. There is an environmental benefit to the leakiness of this, and it falls upon the present property owners nearby to fund this, whereas the environmental benefit is across the district, particularly in the dilution of nitrate. So it's a default, appears to be a default managed aquifer recharge system, and that is increasingly brought up around the zone committee table all the time. And I would be very much in favour that when this this issue goes out for consultation, that in fact we do look at a district-wide rate to entrench the environmental benefit, or certainly put it on the table for discussion. And in the meantime, I'm getting less comfortable with approving closures of bits and pieces until we're able to look at it in its entirety and consider whether we move from property owner rating and acknowledging, of course, that it is a stock water system, but in fact, right from the word go with this, it is confirming an environmental benefit to recharge the aquifer, and that has become really, really important, and the farming community is acknowledging that all the time, and as through the water zone. So I don't think, plus there is also recharge of, whether appropriate or not, recharge of some of the major streams through Rangiora, like the North Brook. We have approved the closure of the race that goes into the headwaters of that stream. It hasn't, as far as I understand, been enacted fully because there is concern from people downstream in urban Rangiora. They want that stream to continue to flow, whereas Runanga don't want that contamination of the water. So there are quite a few issues that I would be very keen to see in the special consultative procedure. It's, as I said, it's gone from being a purely stock water race, to something different, and I think we'd be burying our heads in the sand if we don't acknowledge that and consult with our community on the wider issues here when we do go out for consultation. Thank you.
While I'll be supporting this motion, I am concerned about the comments from feedback from the people. We've got one there, it's hard to mow and would like it filled in, which goes against the drainage side of in floods. Another one there saying it creates spillage and flooding. And then another one says, I haven't seen water flowing in for some time. So there's conflicting evidence from the feedback, and three of those people there wanting it filled in completely. I don't know whether they know the consequences if it did get filled in completely for the drainage. Do they know that it's not going to get filled, or sections of it's not going to, but there is going to be drainage parts encompassed in that area. But once it's closed, all these water races, they won't be opened again. We've lost it probably forever, because it's going to be very hard, and we don't know what the flow-on effect is going to be from closing these water races in the long term, until we get some better knowledge on this groundfall scenario. So there is conflicting feedback there. I'm just a wee bit concerned, that's all.
Chair, Paul here. Paul's covered most of what I was going to say. I just make the point that you can't call this a managed aquifer recharge system if it hasn't had any water in it for 2 to 3 years.
Right, thank you. So I'll ask those in favour of this recommendation, please say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Oh, I beg your pardon. I thought there was enough conversation around it.
Keep us on track.
Yes, yeah. Well, we have to, because we've got time restraints here. So now we're just going to call Colin to come forward, please. Thank you. This is on water strategy conservation 5.2.
Thank you. So the purpose of this report is to update the Utilities and Roading Committee on the performance against our water conservation strategy performance measures, and also to adopt the updated water conservation strategy document. Just as a little bit of background, the water conservation strategy was first adopted in 2010, and at the time it was written that it was intended to be updated every 3 years since that time. And the purpose of the document was to ensure that there were measures in place to make sure that water was used wisely and conservatively in the district. It hasn't actually been updated since 2010, which is why a review was undertaken. So it started off, the initial trigger is that there was an improvement project from the last long-term plan cycle to review the reasonable water use calculations within the document, and so we undertook that review, and it was predominantly just re-inputting data into an equation that had been derived for how to work out reasonable water use, and then also we made some updates to it in terms of information, better data that was available on stock numbers in the district, which feeds into reasonable use on rural schemes. But then once we started feeding that update into the water conservation strategy document, it became apparent that the document was quite out of date in terms of some of the simple things. It referred to schemes that no longer existed because they'd been merged into other schemes, and just some of the data being 10 years old. So that's what triggered a more comprehensive review of the document. So the review mainly consisted of updating that data so it was current, and also just making sure that the explanations of the way that we undertake the practices in it are current still. So as an example, at the time the first water conservation strategy document was produced, we hadn't attempted to measure leakage in the district at that time. It just set out that we would do that, so we have been doing that now annually for the last 10 years, so we're able to report on the how we've actually done it, and then update with genuine results from that. So you can see in table 1 of the report some of the performance against the performance measures in the document. So I'll just run through those. So one of the key ones is the percentage of real water loss from the networked reticulation system. This is a mandatory performance measure we report on annually. The target is 22%, and the assessed leakage for the last assessment period was 25%. So we didn't achieve that target, which I I'll run through the table, then I'll talk about some of the reasons behind that. A second performance measure was the leakage in terms of litres per connection per day. The target was 240, which we met on the district as a whole, but on a scheme by scheme basis, some schemes did and some schemes didn't. But we had, since the report around this time last year, said that we would replace that litres per connection per day performance measure with the infrastructure leakage index as our primary target, because this nationally and internationally, the infrastructure leakage index has been adopted as a more meaningful measure of leakage, because it doesn't just look at how many connections you have, but also the amount of pipework a scheme has, the amount of connections, and the pressure the scheme operates at. So in terms of that measure, we achieved a B result for the scheme as a whole, which was what our target was, to be B or better. And then in terms of reasonable water use, so those three measures above are all to do with leakage. The next two are to do with whether or not we're consuming a reasonable amount of water. So in terms of the actual use on an average day, we performed well at about 68%. And then on a peak day, we were at about 98% of what we considered to be the reasonable limit. And so what that's really saying is, day to day, we're using a reasonable amount of, or a little less than a reasonable amount of water, so we're doing well on that measure. And on peak days, that's when the usage can be quite high. So although we met our target across the district, there were some schemes that had higher use than others. And then the final measure was that we, in terms of allocated units of flow, that all properties on restricted schemes received their correct allocation. And at the moment, we're reporting that as insufficient data, because to report that we meet that, we would have to have an asset management system where we knew the exact flow through every connection in the district, which we are working towards with the AMIS project, but we don't yet have that implemented and have the data flowing back into the assets well enough to confidently give ourselves a 100% score on that mark, meaning we're not able to report that as achieved yet. Although we do undertake restricted schemes, restricted checks on all our restricted schemes. We just can't quite produce the reports to say we're at 100% until we gather that data in a smarter way than we currently are. So just to talk a little bit about the leakage measures that we didn't meet and some of the next steps to address them. In terms of the percentage of real water loss, as I've talked about before, one of the big challenges is not necessarily that we have excessive amount of leakage, but on unmetered schemes, it can be quite challenging to get an accurate measurement of that. And so we use the best tools we have and try to reference methods that are outlined on how we should calculate leakage, but they tend to be a little bit conservative. So we've started to look at better ways to measure leakage as a first step. So an example on work we've done in the last 12 months, Fernside scheme used to be reported based on night flows at about 60% leakage. When we put flow meters out on all the connections that were set up, where you could easily just screw a flow meter on into flow balance, which is a much more accurate way to assess leakage. So we looked at the amount of water leaving the station, looked at the amount of water entering each property that had a meter, and then that instantly dropped our leakage from 60% to about 30%. So we didn't fix a single leak in doing that, but we halved our leakage by gathering better data. So that was quite encouraging, and it's quite achievable on a small scheme that has about 80 connections, but it would become very expensive to do that across the district to go to universal metering. So it won't work for all schemes, but it's something we can implement on other smaller schemes that currently don't meet our targets for leakage. And some examples of that are on table 3, where we've got a scheme by scheme analysis. So the ones we're going to look at next would be Points Road and Garrymere. We can meter them for a period of several months and then look at do a flow balance, and I expect to see those numbers reduced to some extent. And then Mandeville's the other scheme we'd like to look at, but that has about 900 connections, so that method may not be as cost effective on Mandeville. So what we're looking at there is to better inform one of our other assumptions, which is on an on-demand scheme, you look at your flow in the middle of the night or 2 a.m. and you say that flow, the majority of that flow must be leakage, because there's very few people up at 2 a.m. Having showers and using water and that kind of thing. So that's the general philosophy behind our night flow method, and it works reasonably well, although I think still a little conservatively on our on-demand schemes. But on our restricted schemes, you can see across the board they all have higher reported leakage, and that's because restricted schemes are designed that people do actually use or receive water even when they're not using it, because their tanks will continue to fill up after they go to bed and go to sleep until they reach full. So it's definitely conservative on those schemes. So the way we're looking at addressing that is putting out some smarter meters on selected properties to get a better figure for our assumed night leakage per property. So if we gather enough data on, at 2 a.m. the average property uses X litres per second, and we extrapolate that out across the scheme, that will increase our genuine night usage amount, and by doing that it'll decrease our leakage amount. So we've just got 10 meters going out in Mandeville soon to start to build up some data, and then as we collect that data, we'll assess how valuable that data is going to be in terms of refining our understanding of actual leakage. So once we've done a small pilot trial, we'll then assess the value of that and look at whether or not we extend it, and we could then move them around the district and get better night flow, genuine night use values across all our restricted schemes. So again, we expect that will reduce the numbers we're reporting for those schemes. And then the final thing we're starting to look at for some of the larger schemes, such as Rangiora and Kaiapoi, is some form of pressure management. So leakage is directly correlated with pressure. So if you run a scheme at a really high pressure, any small leaks you've got, the water will flow out of them much faster, so you'll get higher leakage rates. So at the moment, our schemes aim to operate at the pressure that the scheme will need at the hottest, the peak time of the peak day of the year. So when everyone wants to use water, we operate at a certain pressure, and that allows for losses throughout the scheme. But all the other times of the year when it's not your peak hour of the peak day, the scheme doesn't actually need as much pressure as we're giving it. So we're looking at whether we can reprogram our pumps to look at the flow, and then if the flow isn't as high, the scheme, the pressure leaving the station can be a little lower, and then as demand comes up, the pressure can come up to compensate. So it will basically mean that we don't have to pressurize our scheme like it's the middle of summer all year round. And then what that will mean is that our night flows will drop, and we'll ideally, we think, be able to report lower night flow values and therefore lower percentages of water lost without having any impact at peak times. So that's just an example of the key things we're looking at doing going forward to address some of those results I talked about. One other thing before I take questions is I thought I should point out measures that were considered in the 2010 document and not included then, and have still not been included now, and that's volumetric charging or full volumetric metering of water connections. So I think a key reason is that this is really just considered to be an update of the data within the water conservation strategy document, and to cover off the strategies we currently use, and I wasn't looking to start to introduce significant new measures such as volumetric charging, because that would be quite a comprehensive process in itself if it was going to be looked at. So it definitely is, there's good evidence to say that the day you introduce volumetric charging, your water use will drop, and also you would get more accurate results with your leakage, because you'd know exactly how much is being used and how much is being lost. but it does also come at a cost. And when that was looked at in 2010, it was, I think, around the $9 million mark to meter every property in the district. So, and at the time it concluded that the amount of money you'd spend on installing all those meters wouldn't offset the savings you'd make. So what we're looking at doing is we can review the numbers that, in terms of the costings from that work in 2010, or actually leading up to the 2010 document, so I think it was around 2007, and that could form part of the Three Waters rating review conversation if it was desired to be included in that, or it wouldn't need to. So I guess if we can produce some more numbers on that, that'll help council to make a decision on whether we want to explore that further, or whether we keep the same conclusion from 2010. So the point really is this report isn't seeking to change that one way or the other, but it is something we could consider in the future. So yeah, the key resolution is just to acknowledge the performance over the last year, and also to adopt the updated water conservation strategy. So happy to take any questions.
Yeah, the first one up is Councillor Ewell.
Look, your last point is actually covering off some of the things. I mean, back in 2008, when we actually had a look at this, we talked about the offset, and it was going to be more cost effective to save water through leakage, stopping leakage, than it was to put water meters on. Reason we have this. You're telling us that the target of 22% hasn't been met. So while accepting this report, and it's a good report, don't get me wrong, I'm just wondering if we're at that point where we need to be looking at that, given the Three Waters change, number one. But number two, we clearly haven't achieved what we set out to achieve, which was to save more water by stopping leaks than putting the measurements on people that they're volumetric. And clearly this is saying we haven't reached 22%, so we haven't done that. So my question is, are we at the point 10 years down the track, which is actually 12 by the time we first started to discuss this, and I accept you guys weren't here, is it time we really seriously looked at that?
I think there are definitely benefits that we would see. Not, putting in meters doesn't stop leaks, but it would help us actually know exactly how many leaks we have, rather than the night flow method, which, although there's a bit of science behind it, is essentially guessing that at a certain time at night the water demand is leaked. So it would help report much more accurately leakage, and I think that would mean that we'd report less, but it wouldn't actually, just installing meters wouldn't stop it wouldn't change the amount of actual water leaking out of our pipes, but it would give us a much better understanding of that. It would, though, reduce the amount of water people consume, and I think there's been reports saying it can cut consumption by about 15 to 20%, so it would help with some of the reasonable water use targets. So it would help with that, but I guess it really is a bit of a benefit cost analysis of would the benefits be worth the cost of doing it, and that's I think the next step would be for us to bring a report actually outlining those costs and bring them up to date. So I probably can't say definitively right now, we should do it or we shouldn't do it. I can give a feel for what sorts of benefits we'd get, but I think the costs are quite out of date now. That I think that would be a next step before making a recommendation on that.
Well, just two very quick questions. Number one, if we did have volumetric measuring and we found out where the leaks were, surely that's something that council would work on. Without it, we don't know where the leaks are in the pipe, so we can't work on where they are.
Yeah.
So surely that would, my question is, surely that would help us actually do something about leakage as opposed to not knowing.
Yeah.
And the second question around that is around the Three Waters review. And, if we're to, should we spend time on researching this, or should we just hang off and let the government do it? I mean, that's the question behind. I was hoping I'd get that out of the first one, but never mind.
Yes, I think with the Three Waters review, there's probably, I could come up with arguments either way on it. I could say, well, it would help demonstrate that we have a really good understanding of how all our systems work, and it would put us in a good place to demonstrate what a good job we're doing. But at the same time, you could argue if it's a foregone conclusion, then why do it, and why not wait for it to be implemented by someone else? So I think it potentially depends on how you would assume the Three Waters review is going to pan out. Yeah, sorry, that's the very non-committal answer.
Yeah. Flow on peak days calculations. Where do we compare our flows with other towns, or where do we compare that with for the amount of water being used?
That's a good question. I haven't provided a comparison with other districts in here. It's easy to provide a comparison on the types of measures that are in for example, the Water New Zealand National Performance Review and documents like that, which are percentage of water losses and infrastructure leakage index. There's not a universal, or not that I'm aware of, a measure that we could compare for those measures that's assessed consistently nationally. So the answer is I don't know. Sorry.
Yeah. And the other question is, for getting our water losses, leakages, we're calling it, it may not actually be leakages. It might be garden auto systems that come on at 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning to water people's lawns, because we have got a very garden-orientated towns around the areas, and probably bigger sections of what a lot of other areas have. So it may not actually be all water leakage loss. It might be just we're not familiar with what's happening out there. Could be?
Yeah, I think in general, I'm sure that is a big part of it. When we measure or look at our networks on other metrics, our pipe age is generally very good. Our pipe break rates is pretty good as well. There's a lot of data that suggests our pipe networks are actually in very good condition. So I think you're probably correct that our leakage is probably quite good, but we just don't, it's very difficult to get evidence to prove that without measuring what everyone's doing at night, and the only way to measure that is to put a meter on every house and then read it every year. So it's really a question of how much can we achieve without that versus the cost of doing it. I think from a financial point of view, the cost of, if you did that, if you measured everything and your measured leakage went from 25% to 15%, you've spent a whole lot of money on meters, but you still haven't actually stopped consuming any water. You've just now can confidently report a better number. So you haven't actually saved necessarily any money in that. And Councillor Atkinson might be right. It might help you find some leaks as well, but it's not necessary. I think the main benefit would be equity if you then use it for charging and people pay based on how much they use, and also giving us better data to report and a better understanding of our systems. But I don't think it would be financial in terms of lowering the cost of the systems by saving money. And our water is still, the production cost of water is still quite cheap in the district as a whole. So it wouldn't be a financial based decision, I don't think, but more either an equity or a just understanding the networks type benefit.
Elle.
Page 52, Colin, the table there on the urban flows. Why is Waikuku's percentage figure so high of actual versus reasonable? Is that a true figure, or does that relate to what you've alluded to with complications of data collection?
Let me just catch up, sorry. I think that, so in terms of our reasonable water use calculations, they take into account a number of factors, like if it's rural or urban, or if there's stock or there's not. But what it doesn't take into account is the soil type or the land area. So my theory is Waikuku Beach generally have quite large sections and quite sandy soil, so probably people there like their gardens, and it flows through the sand, and probably to maintain a garden there, we could introduce some. We did consider having some kind of factor in terms of what's reasonable, and saying if you've got a bigger garden, it's reasonable to think you would water your garden more than someone with a small section. But at the moment, we don't have that factor in there, because on the other hand, you could argue, well, no one should be you shouldn't have 1,000 square metre garden, because that's not good use of water. So I guess it depends what we think is a legitimate reason to use more water and what isn't, and that's one question where it's at the moment the equation doesn't consider that a reason to use more water. But I think it is, if you look at the other schemes such as Oxford and Ahoka and Garrymere, they're kind of the schemes where people do have larger sections and probably enjoy their gardening more than potentially somewhere like Rangiora or Kaiapoi, where there's more of the typical kind of smaller sort of 400, 600, 800 square metre sections than the quite large ones. So I think that's probably the biggest factor.
Robbie.
So, with regard to depressurising the supplies, as a keen gardener who works shift work, I'll often water my garden at night. Will I notice the drop in pressure?
I will definitely monitor that. So I think the theory is, when on a peak day, our water headworks has to have pressure up here to make sure you get pressure, of that lower level. So we might offer it at 500 kPa to give you 300, because the more water you're sending out, you get losses through the network, so the pressure slowly drops. But then on any other day where you don't have that high demand, we'll be sending out 500 kPa and you'll be getting 500 kPa in your garden. So what we're looking at doing is, whatever that minimum pressure target is, on the peak day, the station will come up to achieve that. So you will never get less water pressure than your minimum. You just won't necessarily get that over pressure that you don't need on the cooler months, or at 2 a.m. where very few people are using water. So it shouldn't get to a point where it's noticeable. It's more of a subtle change that we just don't apply that pressure when nobody needs it. Yep.
Long explain to no. Sandra, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Are you proposing to update, cost of metering and all the issues that you've raised with measuring leakage for the LTP or our own Three Waters rating review, independent of doing anything we see that may be of interest to the wider Three Waters review?
Yeah, I think that's what's been suggested, that as a minimum we'll bring you figures on what it would cost to implement metering.
Is that for the LTP?
Well, the last suggestion on that was for that to help inform the Three Waters rating review, which is after the LTP. So, because I think it's too big an issue to say now, for the LTP, should we introduce universal metering and volumetric charging? But we can start to gather that data to inform the rating review after that.
Okay.
Two interrelated questions. Are some of these connections on these schemes perhaps used for irrigation by any chance?
They could be. They could only really handle domestic garden irrigation. You couldn't get enough through a 15 mil connection to, irrigate a paddock or something like that.
Okay, because basically, I note that you are only 3% off of your target, and as Robbie has and Paul have also raised, my question is that could it not be that there are in fact people who are watering, because there is a raised awareness of the appropriate times to water the most effectively. I know with our lifestyle block group, for instance, we had somebody come in and talk to us about that very thing, that, you know, watering in a howling nor'west on a hot day is a silly thing to do. It's a waste of water. So could there be people using timers, or maybe even some small commercial, like say glasshouse operation, not glasshouse, but tunnel house operations and things that are possibly using this, these water supplies, so it's not in fact leakage at all. Because if we're talking about leakage versus the expense and trouble of putting in meters, how do we actually know what this water is being used for, when it could very well be people just watering at a more effective time of night?
Yeah, and that's a key thing you've picked up on. That part of our education is exactly that. To address the peak use, you say to people, don't water it when it's sunny. Water, put it on a timer and water at 11 p.m. or 2 a.m. or whenever. So that's good for the network and everything. We don't have to oversize all our pipes and things to meet really high peak demands. But then if everyone does water at night, then it looks like our night flow is high, and it makes us look bad in our night flow analysis. So I guess the only thing is the impact of it is probably not that significant, because we look in winter at night. So then you wouldn't get as many people watering then, but maybe there's some who just have a timer on. They set it in summer and they just keep it going year round because I don't know. So I guess it probably sound like the same point over and over, but without meters, you don't know on a house by house basis what people are doing. With what we're looking at in Mandeville, we're trying to get a typical value that we could apply for this as a typical genuine night use on a restricted scheme, because there are published figures on typical night use on demand schemes that we input into our equation, but nothing typical on a restricted scheme. So we either you have to collect that data yourself, or you have to make assumptions about it. And at the moment we're making assumptions, but trying to collect a little bit on restricted schemes to make it a little bit smarter.
So you are actually measuring this at 2 a.m. in the winter?
Yeah.
Sorry, I missed that.
Yeah, sorry. We measure flow constantly, every scheme 24/7, and then we look at the minimum flow at night and at winter to see when, pretty much the lowest patch we can find.
So your leakage rate percentage has actually come from a winter measurement?
Yep.
All right, thank you.
Any more questions? Paul, you want to move? Yeah. Thank you. So it's Paul moving and Al seconding. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think exactly a good report, and I think you're probably right on assumptions, because I believe likes of Waikaku, they are going to be using more water because of the ground, what have you, and we have got quite a flower-orientated gardening community, and I would be concerned if we started spending a lot of money on metering and found out we actually haven't got as much losses as what we think due to leakages, because we actually have got a good pipe system around the community, and I think we just need to carry on like that. I would be a wee bit concerned about lowering the pressure, because that could show false evidence, because you lower the pressure, you're actually going to get less water out of your end of your garden hose as well. So it's a trade-off. Lowering pressure, you're going to get less litres per second example. So it may not be give the bees and knees, but I think good report, and yeah.
Al, do you wish to say no? Neville.
Thank you. Look, I'm going to play devil's advocate here, and something for us to think about. This is a good report, and it's in front of us. But we've got the Three Waters review going on. Are we spending a lot of money here that we don't need to spend at the moment? The government's going to spend anyway. And i.e., whether we're going to need meters may not be up to us, maybe up to the government. Whether we need to monitor this any further, because we have the evidence that we have now, which is very accurate. Do you hedge your bets for a couple of years, pull your money out of this space for your research, leave it alone until such time as we know what Three Waters is doing? Now, I mean, that's playing the devil's advocate, but I'm putting it out there. There's some savings to be made here if we don't do anything until we find out what the government's doing.
Want to make a comment? Yes. Andrew.
I wasn't actually going to say anything, but in response to Councillor Atkinson, it's not we around this table. It's in fact the costs will be our ratepayers. So to me, it's immaterial whether we wait till Three Waters review comes in. We've got, and you know, no, I don't necessarily believe this. I'll say it. It's never cheaper to do something now than in the future, because we've heard that argument all the time. So I'd be interested in finding out more accurately what is the situation as far as leakage goes. And the other question that has struck me is whether our leaving it as it is and the calculations that we're making now, right now are going to be acceptable to the Three Waters review, and we're going to see our ratepayers forced to front up and pay for something that we could perhaps look at and progressively, well, certainly consult on and progressively look to implement. So, I mean, it's not a saving to us as a council. I don't know until I see the data that is going to be presented in a report, whether in fact I would consider it to be a good, sustainable move in across our district or not. So, I mean, I don't buy that argument that I would need more data if I was going to buy that argument, and welcome the report that Colin's talking about, but he's not talking about now, he's talking about for 2022, when in fact we're going to look at this district, our own Three Waters rating review. So yeah, I would welcome data sooner rather than later, so that, and I think we may be required, well, we or some other entity will require the work to be done. But the guts of it is, it comes back to our ratepayers having to, or not having to, front up to pay for some of this. So I'd like to get my head round, the sooner the better, as I've said, exactly what potentially could be involved, because, as I said, don't know whether our calculation here is acceptable. And I wouldn't want to see suddenly that our ratepayers are going to have to front up with the cost of metering and our leakage, which we think you've potentially within cooey of achieving something acceptable. And personally, I find if 22% leakage isn't acceptable at all. But I'd rather have that information in front of me sooner than later.
Councillor Williams, do you wish to have a right of reply?
Yeah. I actually agree with Councillor Atkinson. Like, we shouldn't really be spending a big cost for better data, because I believe the staff, what they say, we've got good piping systems around the area. We get leakage because if there's a fire, the fire brigade's practicing, they pump out the hydrants. That's classed as a bit of a leakage if we do the at particularly different times and what have you. So I just trust our staff that they've told me that we've got some really good pipe work around there. Good pipe work doesn't cause leaks. I think it's because we've got areas where we're using a lot of water, because we've got good gardens around the areas, and we've got a lot of people now have been educating to use their water their lawns at night time and all that type of scenario. So I think we've got a reasonably good system now, so, of reporting.
Right, we're going to the recommendation from A to I. Is all in favour? Please say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Thank you. Right, you're on again.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you
So-
very much.
So this report is for the to request approval to submit the Ahoka Water Safety Plan to our drinking water assessor. So this is another plan that has come up for its 5-year anniversary, meaning it needs to be updated. Just to give a very short overview of the scheme, I think this scheme is quite a good candidate to get an approved plan. It's got, the infrastructure is relatively new and in good condition. We've got a secure source and we've got chlorine in place. The one key thing that's been highlighted in the water safety plan that we recommend addressing is to upgrade the tanks, partly because they're older concrete ones which tend to not have a great life in terms of before they start being prone to leakage. And while the chlorine helps with that, it's still better not to have the risk of leaking tanks in the first place. And also in terms of the hours of emergency storage, it doesn't meet our performance measure, so we recommend putting in some more storage there, and that was part of the basis for including that as one of the proposed stimulus projects, which will be covered by a report coming on the council agenda soon as well. So hopefully we can address that one key recommendation through that project, which will also help with the HOKA scheme, who have funded their main upgrade recently. I think I was going to give a bit of an update on the general status of water safety plans as well, but Kelly covered that at the start. In terms of, we got a little bit of feedback from the Director General of Health on the status across the country, which, yeah, as Kelly said, that there haven't been any approved plans under the new framework, although we do think some are coming shortly. And we do have a number of outstanding plans which I covered. So Waikuku Beach has been resubmitted. Cust, Garrymere and Ahoka Cust and Garrymere have been submitted for assessment, but as far as I know, they're not actively being assessed. And then Ahoka will submit after this, and then so that'll be 4 plans that we'll have sitting with the drinking water assessor once this one's in, and then Woody and Pegasus needs to go back as well, as we noted, because it's been submitted and not approved. So we are kind of building up more and more plans that we need to get across the line, but I think the expectation is once there is a benchmark set for what an approved plan looks like, that will be a huge help to everyone else who's trying to get to that point. So hopefully we can start to make some progress once we see some approvals come through. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Any questions? Well, no questions. Well, I'm going to move this recommendation. You want recommendation from A to E? Someone like to second it, please? Thank you. Pauline's to second it. Thank you very much for this report, Colin. I'm very pleased that you are putting the Ahoka water safety plan for submission for the drinking water assessor to follow, and that the new tanks will be put in there under that, what was the scheme called? Stimulus. Yes, that's right. Yes, and I'm really thrilled about that, because it's good that Hoka is getting a little bit of help, because they have spent quite a substantial amount of money on to getting their water upgraded. So thank you.
I've got nothing to say. Good report.
Anybody else wish to? Right. All those in favour from A to E? Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Gavin, would you like to come forward for your Eastern District Sewer Scheme and your monitoring report? Thank you.
Hello everyone. This report is to provide the committee an update on the compliance monitoring period for the Eastern District Sewer Scheme for 2019 to 2020. The compliance was fully achieved across all the measurements that we measure for the outfall consent. the impact of COVID-19 was minimal. The water unit did a great job in maintaining our sampling regime as required under the consent. The report that was appended to the monitoring report has been sent to the Canterbury Regional Council, and they're still reviewing it. We haven't received feedback, but we expect them to provide a full compliance report back to us shortly. In general, the plants have performed well over the monitoring period. There's no unusual events, and they are still performing well, and there's been no significant maintenance works undertaken, just general what I'd call housekeeping, keeping the plants operating as they have been to date, and keeping on top of our maintenance.
Anyone wish to ask any questions? Right. Someone like to move it, please? Thank you, Paul. Seconded. Thank you, Robbie. Do you wish to speak?
Oh, I'd just like to think for the report, it's really good to know that we 100% comply. So, yeah, it's really good to hear that. Thank you.
To speak? No. Does anybody else wish to speak? Right, we'll put the recommendation from A to E. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you very much. Right, we're going to move on then. Reports for information. Don, do you want to come forward? Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have really nothing further to add to this. I think the council, the utilities, the committee is well aware of the specific issue, and the council has discussed it and agreed with consulting on the move of the path to the eastern side. That consultation has begun. Letters have gone out, and information is available on the web. And we have two drop-in sessions tomorrow. One starting at 7:30 in the morning and one starting at 4 in the afternoon. Both at the Soda Cafe. So councillors are more than welcome to come along, and staff will be there with the plans and the flyers, and happy to discuss with any of the local businesses. I think after that we will have a much better idea as to the flavour from the businesses, and that'll form part of a report back as to a final recommendation following on from the feedback we get back, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Would you please just say the times again? It was 7:40 in the morning and
7:30.
Oh, 7:30. I'd be late.
7:30 till 9 o'clock, and 4:30 until 6 p.m.
Thank you.
And they are just drop-in sessions where people can come in at any time during that. Staff will just be available. There'll be no presentation or anything like that. And no, it's not a meeting as such, rather just staff will be available.
Thank you. Anyone wish to ask? Yes.
Just one question about the drop-in centres. Why have we just been waited till now to be told about 7:30 at Soda Cafe tomorrow? Should not the councillors have been informed a wee bit earlier of these drop-in sessions? I knew that they're going to communicate with the people there, the business and all that, but I actually wasn't quite aware of the actual times of a drop-in session. Just can we in future?
My apologies. I'd understood that all of the flyers which these times are in had been circulated to the councillors as well, and if that's not the case, I apologise.
That's quite correct. We haven't. Have you received one? No, we haven't. No. But thank you.
My apologies.
No, that's fine. But thank you very much for letting us know the times if anyone wishes to drop in. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else wish to have anything to say? Someone like to move this recommendation, this report? They're just reports for information. Yeah. Oh, right here. Okay. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, we've got another one here which will come forward, which is on the bus stop locations as well, please. Yep. So you don't need to talk about it? Well, I would like perhaps if there was opportunity for you to ask questions. Yes. Yeah, will do, yep, yep.
I'll take the reports as read
Yeah.
as well. Just one thing I will note is there were a couple of bus stop locations where we said we were going to do additional work,
Yes.
looking at options, and we've currently got that work underway. One of those was outside the Plough Hotel on High Street, and the other one I think was, from memory, on Fuller Street in Kaipoi. So we're just working through those to see whether there are any further available options for those bus stops, and then we can update the boards after that.
Thank you. Just a question. What happens if the neighbour, you consult with the neighbours first?
Yes, so Kathy's carried out quite a lot of consultation on those bus stop locations. She's worked with the residents to pick locations which have the least impact on residents. Locations where there are pretty substantial hedges or fences so that the buses don't cause noise or sight issues for the residents. So that's something that Kathy always had front of mind when she's carrying out those consultations.
And just my other question from that one is the bus stop that we've recently put in High Street. That's a really good style. Are you proposing to do much the same style as that one?
So is that in reference to the shelter that's out here on High Street?
Yes.
So no, these are just stops that don't include shelters at this stage. That shelter was a particularly high quality one because of the number of boardings we get there. So in the morning I think we have well over 20 people boarding at that bus stop. So that's why a higher level of service, I guess, has been provided there. What we will be looking at going forward is more shelters, but that will be brought to council as part of the LTP process.
Haven't really got much to report. Everything's sort of, we've got the new contractors, and the Mayor and myself have got a meeting coming up with the SICON to give our view on what we think the standard should be, and apart from that I think everybody else knows what's happening around the area, so not much to report this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Nor have I got much to report, but I'll just add that I think in preparation for the special consultative procedure around the Stockwater bylaw review, that Sophie Allen and Kate Steele are out at various points in the system doing baseline ecological studies on what is actually alive and swimming in the races to inform the review. Plus, I think there is a report pending about supplementing flow in our urban streams through Rangiora, because some residents, at the moment, some of these streams, as I indicated earlier, particularly the North Brook, is dry in patches and has been supplemented, as we know, from the Stockwater race, and the issue of continuing a Stockwater race through into an urban area, it has no benefit and is paid for by property owners upstream. That has in the past been an issue that we've not seen as a reason for continuing the water supply. So those two things are ongoing, so I understand. The other thing I thought of after we approved the Eastern District's sewer scheme annual compliance report is to actually send that report to the Water Zone committee. They're interested in that, and you can do that either by through information to Land and Water or directly to the Water Zone committee. But I think they appreciate looking at that. Thank you.
Oops, so yeah, I'm just quite pleased with the report we've just had about 100% complying for the ocean outfall, which is a really good result. We've had some negative feedback from a few people about our ocean outfalls, and I only hope we will look at upgrading the system, because I think when we do apply for our new consent on it, we may have to, the level's going to be up, but that's good. We've got a meeting at Thursday week at Points Road, and hopefully we'll get that over the line to with the people on that scheme, and so everything's sort of flowing very good in the wet department.
How long did it take you to think that up? Well done. Thank you very much. Right, Robbie, please, on solid waste.
So we had joint landfill committee and Cape Valley committee on the 10th of August in Christchurch. Nothing of particular. We approved $100,000 towards some recycling activity. So nothing came from that. You're all aware of the latest drive with regard to the yellow bins, so I won't go into that. There was another mishap at the transfer station yesterday with a corrections worker who was tasked to pick up some litter, move some bins that fell on her. Apparently she's hurt her knee, but I have nothing more in that regard as to her condition. That's me.
You said that will come through the health and safety, won't it? Thank you. Transport, please, Mayor Dan.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Just a few things to update on regarding the third lane and all the work on the bridge. That's taken quite a lot of... we've had a few meetings about that in terms of making sure that CNC are aware of our community's concerns and keeping the traffic flowing. Can I thank our staff for Joanne and her team for being out there and proactively managing that, by way of not proactively managing but proactively being there to observe so that changes could be implemented if needed, because it was pretty tense there in that first week, and certainly leading into it we were getting quite a bit of feedback, but that seems to have settled fairly well. And they're making good progress on the bridge, which is really good. So we had discussions with CNC and also Jim Harland about just making sure that all the relevant authorities were making the changes where needed to make sure that the progress was progressing well there. And as you'll have seen, there's been an invite that came today following a discussion that Jared, Joanne and myself were in with CNC, and they've invited the council to come and have a advanced look at the new Northern Corridor. I've extended that to include some of our GCP partners as well as Mayor of Hiranui and our relevant staff. So I think that'll be a good opportunity to see the new Northern Corridor, so please let Rosie know if you're able to attend. Tram road safety, there's been a few issues raised with that following an incident there last week, so we had a Zoom call with Jim Harland on Monday, and we've got a follow-up with the lady that's raised a number of concerns. I've had a lot of feedback to my Facebook about it. I know you probably have as well, Nikki, because we were tagged into it, and Wendy has also shared some comments. So we've got a meeting coming up with Jim Harlan next week or so with that individual to talk through the comments that she's received and for that to be considered in terms of road safety issues there. Last week went into Environment Canterbury for the unveiling of the new livery of the buses, which look fantastic actually. So progressively over time, as the new buses come on stream or are replaced, that new livery will be there. It'll be a teal colour, moving away from individual colouring except for the orbiter, so that there's just one network of bus colours. So all it'll have on the side of it is it'll just change the name. So if it's Rangiora 1 or whatever the route name is, that'll be on it. And coincidentally, when I was in there, the route name was Rangiora 1 on the bus, so it was quite good. So I think Ecan have managed that really well. Lynn Tiaka was involved in coming up with the livery, and there's a really good story there, Joanna. It'd be really good if Kathy or the team could share that to members, because it goes through how that was all achieved and what all the symbols mean on the side. It was really good. Last GCP, Greater Christchurch meeting, is Nikki will know there was quite a discussion on bringing in passenger transport. It's fair to say that whilst we support passenger transport matters coming into the GCP, we've got to be very clear of agendas and other things that are going on, and there was certainly some messaging that came from the city that we've got to manage outside of the meeting before it goes. And I've arranged a meeting with Councillor Davidson to talk further about those, because whilst I'm supportive of it coming in and streamlining it, I'm not personally supportive of PT being removed from Environment Canterbury, so that's not a particular agenda that I have. So I think we just need to be really clear about and upfront about that. Paul may have mentioned around the meetings tomorrow that staff have organised around Flaxton. So there's two, one at 7:30 and one at 4:30 tomorrow afternoon at Soda Cafe. So thanks to Don and the team for their work in advancing that project. It will be really important for our district. So look forward to attending those tomorrow.
Now, any questions under standing orders? No. Any urgent general business? No. Our next meeting will be the 17th of November 2020 in the function room at the Rangiora Town Hall. So I will declare this meeting closed at 5:26, but stop. We have a briefing on roading designations. Thank you.